Hi, everyone. This week we are going to be learning about linguistic diversity in schools in the United States. This is chapter 6. So, after last week and where you read lots and lots of chapters, this week will probably feel very, very light in comparison. Not that the topic is light, of course. There's a lot to cover and a lot that will be covered in chapter 6. And many of these things you may not have already learned, but you will be learning more about as you progress through your courses here at ISU and learn more about supporting students who don't speak English as their primary language. So in chapter 6, it starts off by thinking about some of the different terms that are used to represent children or people who speak languages other than English as their primary language. And as you learned from the chapter and as pointed out on this slide, there are many different names, labels, whatever you would like to call them, associated with these folks who speak another language other than English as their primary language. Things have changed over time. For many years, all government documents used the term or the phrase limited English proficient, which thankfully has, because it sounds very negative, most of those have been removed, and now terms such as English language learners or dual language learners are much more frequently used to describe children or others who do not speak English as their primary language. So as you have learned in chapter 6 and probably are already familiar with, we have a long history in the United States of thinking of people who speak languages other than English as bad, or there's a negative connotation with that. For many years, people, sort of have focused on the primary goal for anyone who speaks a language other than English is to learn English if they're going to live in the United States. Even though, ironically enough, English is not the national language. There is no national language in the United States. That said, it has long been seen as being more a good thing, I guess, for lack of a better word, to speak English and speak English fluently and well. And so over time, and we read about this in the chapter throughout history, there were people who, after World War I and World War II, people who spoke German were discouraged from speaking German. They would change their names, etc., because of the association with Germans in the World Wars. In some cases, even today, we sometimes think of people who speak Spanish, we have a negative connotation because we may think, we hear so much these days about immigrants and people at the border. And so there tend to be sometimes these negative associations with people who speak other languages, which is really interesting because this is a very U.S.-centric way of seeing things. And you'll learn this when you, for those of you who visited Spain, they are, of course, because they speak Spanish primarily. But also, even for those of you who are getting ready to go to England, kids in England start learning foreign languages very, very early. And so it's very much something that's unique to the United States that we focus so much on English acquisition and not multiple language acquisition. Excuse me. So another piece of the chapter was a lot about different laws that have been passed over time, most of them in support of children being able to maintain their native language. This is not something that's new. As you can see, these are laws that some of them date back to the 60s. And so This isn't a new issue by any means. However, what is perhaps a bit disheartening is how much we still struggle with how best to support students who speak multiple languages. And so when we think about this in the context of schools, within the context of society, in the United States, we have this push and pull. You see these two ends of the spectrum here, where there are, in some instances, students that are over-identified as needing additional supports, such as special education. And then there are, on the other end of the spectrum, some children who do not get identified when they need extra support because people will say, oh, they're only, not doing well in school because they don't speak English fluently. Or on the other end, they'll say, no, they don't speak English fluency, so we need to put them in special ed, when they may speak their home language completely fine. So, what's important for us to think about as teachers, and this is pointed out in Chapter 6, are the ways that we can support our students in a variety of ways by including materials, by learning key phrases in the child's home language, by not putting the onus back on the student to always have to figure things out, that we are active participants in helping them feel safe, supported, and welcome in our classroom environments. So we know that a child's language is the foundation for learning. We know that all learning builds on prior knowledge and experiences. And so for many years, and some people still today, believe that children who don't speak English fluently are just kind of like, oh, we're starting from scratch. We just need to teach them English and then everything will be fine. And we don't take into account the importance of maintaining their home language in order to continue to keep ties with their culture. And so what we see many times, and in many cases, and some of you may have even experienced this in school yourself or with those who you're close with, is that, students tend to gravitate, or children tend to gravitate toward the language that is spoken in society, that's spoken around them, that's spoken at school. And so what can happen is that a child can lose touch with their culture and their family because they feel it's very important to learn English, and perhaps sometimes even more so than mastering their home language, which of course then can create quite a disconnect between that child and their family, which is, of course, what we don't want to see. Oops, excuse me. So there are a number of different program models out there for teaching students who speak multiple languages, or speak a language, their native language other than English. And these are described in more detail in Chapter 6. I'm actually going to try to sneak over to get that. So skip forward here a few pages. In the textbook, in Chapter 6, they outline, I think, could I go one more page? Okay. Yes, these are good things that you can do. Just talked about that. Yes. Okay, programs. Here we go. There are a number of different programs for teaching emergent bilinguals. This is on page 196 in your textbook. So structured English immersion. This is a model where students are actually removed and put in a separate classroom where they learn everything in English, and then they are eventually moved into a regular classroom. As you can imagine, this is often very disruptive to that child's native language. When students are learning English as a second language, there is some attempt at maintaining their home language, although it's typically the case that children are expected to learn English as soon as possible. In bilingual education, there are lots of different models. And so in this case, where if you think about bilingual, it's the idea that children can be learning two different languages at the same time. And there are models where the child is learning English at the same time as their home language, where they're in different percentages of the time they're learning English or in English only programs. The dual language education is, again, that they're learning at the same time. There's lots and lots of different models out there. So be sure to read this section carefully. And again, you will be spending more time with this as you take additional courses in support of English language learners in your courses at ISU. So in terms of problems and challenges, there's still, like I said, even though we've had had laws in place for many, many decades, there still are a lot of challenges when it comes to supporting English language learners. One being that we don't often educate you all as teachers well enough to be able to support students or help you understand the importance of children maintaining their home language and learning English at some point in time. And so that is an issue that I think we're beginning to get better at. We do have more courses. We do have more resources for you all to become more, I would say, more educated in terms of how you can support your students. We know that in some cases we have low expectations for students who are non-English speakers, that we really focus more solely on students learning English versus them maintaining their home culture and language, which is a problem. We have issues with assessment, and so where we end up with students overrepresented in special education or underrepresented in special education, it's often the case that the assessments that are used are not appropriate, are not provided in that child's home language, are not culturally appropriate, and so on. Just the way that students are educated within schools can be very segregated, just as we know is often the case with children in special education programs. And so what we can do is to work on developing systems. Sorry, let me get back over here. Systems and supports for students to feel more comfortable, to feel more at home at school with using their native language, with feeling comfortable with their native language before they start taking on more and more and having more expectations for them to learn English. So these are the things that I just pointed out. So keeping these things in mind as we move forward. Later, when we get to chapters, I think 9 and 10, we'll talk a little bit more about different programs that are out there in support of students who are learning English but do not speak English as their primary language. So that was a really quick run through chapter 6. I think it's important, again, for us to always remember, as this states at the bottom here, to honor and affirm students' native languages, their families, their communities, what they bring, that we should never expect students to be the translators for their family, that we always provide supports and services when we can to ensure that everyone feels comfortable being a part of that educational system. So in terms of what's next, as you know, we are going to be taking a little break. So we have our reflective journal that's due on Sunday. Oopsie, let me go back over here. Excuse me. So we have journal 3 that's due on Sunday, June 30th. We also have our education and social issues paper that's due on Sunday. So as you're going through, let me go back over here, the module for this week, I'm going to put the presentation in here. I'm recording it right now, so it's not there yet. Here's your weekly module. Here's your education and social issues paper. When you click on that, you'll be able to see the assignment guidelines and rubric. So for this assignment, you will be doing some research on a social and educational issue that's something that's appropriate or applicable in your host country as well as in the United States. In this paper, you're going to be comparing and contrasting what is happening related to this education and social issue in the United States and in your host country. Your paper should be 3 to 5 pages, double-spaced, and should meet these criteria that are in the rubric as well. So be sure to take a look at those. So that is due on Sunday, as well as your reflection number 3. And then remember, we take this long break, almost a full month, while our friends who are going to be going to England will be out of the country. So if you would like to keep working ahead and finish out the coursework, especially for the 2 of you who were in Spain at the beginning of the summer, you can certainly do that, but you're not required to submit these assignments and kind of jump back in until the week of August. What is that week? When does that begin? Let me think here. Just a second. That begins August 5th, on Monday, the August 5th. So I'll put some reminders in emails so that you'll be able to know where we're at. But remember, again, we'll come back into things, jump back into things in August. So I hope that you all who are going to England have a fabulous time. If you have questions about anything, anywhere along the way, don't hesitate to reach out. Take care.